I've been with Booz Allen Hamilton for a little bit more than 18 years. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Booz Allen, we are a management consulting firm. Primarily, we're global, but headquarters in DC, and we primarily focus on federal clients, although we do have some commercial clients and also kind of an international push as well, as we become a global organization. So I am one of the directors that we have within the organization for data analytics and artificial intelligence. What I'm here to talk to you about today is a framework that we had created through a bunch of conversations with clients and kind of understanding what folks' needs were around data and analytics. We developed it over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, and we use it to talk to clients about data and analytics. It's almost a bit of a maturity model, so we'll walk through that. Last year, I was actually asked to move internal to our organization and not be as much client-focused and actually apply this framework to ourselves to make Booz Allen be more data-driven. We're selling this to clients. Why don't we actually use it, internally? And so one of the things that I wanted to cover sort of at the end of the 30-minute session was, as we've been applying it, what are some of the initial lessons learned that we've even had just coming out of the first year? So, great management consultants listen to all the questions and the feedback that our clients provide. And these are some of the questions that we've heard. Typically, when we have a client that has done something like purchased a piece of technology or is focusing on a data set specifically to solve kind of a problem that they're having, we find that they don't think about the full landscape of all the things they need to think about with regards to process, with regards to people, and ultimately sort of the culture of the organization to think about it holistically. And so in all true consultant flavor, we immediately went to kind of the maturity model. I'm sure many of you are aware of some of these, if not all of them. The data management maturity model and the CRISP methodology are some of my favorites, just in the sense that they're very specific. But what we found when we started looking at those were that they really didn't cover some of the talent pieces and also some of the culture pieces about what you needed to do to ultimately see success in moving towards being more data-driven. And so what we did is we created kind of our own framework that we felt like was more specific to the way that we wanted to talk to clients about data and analytics, and ultimately provide a lot of our lessons learned into what we were providing to our clients. So let me go through the different elements. Sort of starts up at the top with analytic opportunities. These are really the questions you want to ask of your data and figuring out really what your priorities are in terms of a need. The D stands for data. So what data do you have? How is it governed? Do you have standards around it? Where is it housed? How can people access it? All of the like of those things. Analytic techniques are really the algorithms and the models, et cetera, that you need to use, whether they be statistical or true data science models, et cetera. That all fits into that category. P stands for people. So who are the people within your organization? How are they aligned? How do you recruit for them? How do you train them internally? How do you retain them and really not lose a bunch of them to attrition and make sure that you're providing them with what they need? T is for the technology. It's really meant to be the infrastructure, the platform. A lot of what we've been talking about yesterday, that's the part that I would kind of fit under T. And then ultimately comes together with the culture. So from leadership on down, do you have an organization that is ready and willing to accept that you are able to and that you can make decisions truly based on looking at the data and actually believing what it's telling you? So ADAPT+C can be turned into many things. So, as a consultant and helping clients, we've used it in a number of different ways to talk to people about data and analytics. So we use it as a framework for discussion and really how do you go about forming a total package of what you want to do to move forward. We also use it as a capability builder. So which pieces of the framework do you need to focus on first to make sure that you're thinking about the full landscape? So you might spend some time focusing on your data and then understanding that you need to focus on the analytic techniques and the people to ultimately support kind of what you want to do in that mind frame. And then finally, sort of comes with its own approach, which we're going to walk through here in a few minutes, as well as the maturity model. In my role at Booz Allen, we've actually run through several of these instances already internally. So we went through a particular methodology and then created a framework over the course of the next 3 years, which is what I'm driving at Booz Allen today. So let's go a little bit into the approach. So initially, you want to develop kind of an overall vision, like where are you going to go? So one of the things that makes it relevant is to think about yourself in terms of like taking a trip on a car, right? In a car, where do you ultimately want to go, making sure that you understand what that means for your organization. Secondly is really taking a bit of a dive and a self-evaluation of kind of what your current capabilities are. So, where you have data scientists already, where your analytics like-minded people actually sit in the organization, what capabilities you might already have, even if they're small scale within parts of the organization. This is one of the things we found at Booz Allen. We're an organization with 26,000 people, many of which are entrepreneurs as they are thinking about their own client spaces. And so we have many small pockets of folks that are driving really cool, innovative projects, but they're not able to provide that scale. So in some respects, you're looking for what are those little nuggets that you can sort of build on and use those folks as champions kind of as you move forward. So ultimately, that's kind of assessing your current landscape. After that, you want to really determine what your path forward is. So, where do you want to go, and what are the things that, based on your own current capabilities, you're not yet able to do because you've got maybe a gap in some part of the organization. And then last, it's really thinking about how to build and grow and reinforce that capability throughout your company, right? And this is something that we are continuing to work as we think through it at Booz Allen. So let's think about some of the goals. This is really ultimately where you sort of start. One of the things that we have focused on is thinking about the ultimate goals of the in our sense, it's a federal entity, a lot of our federal clients. What do they ultimately want to get out of it, right? Are they trying to create efficiency? Are they trying to do things faster? What ultimately is the goal that they want to get to, and how do they want to align their vision towards that? Typically, once we think about that overall vision, then you can sort of see how those elements of ADAPT+C sort of line up to be able to support ultimately what that vision is. The next part is typically the assessment, and this is really where the meat comes in terms of the types of things that you ultimately need to do to advance your capability. So each one of these, so the 6 elements break out into actually 55 sub-elements, and we've got a full assessment, maturity model assessment that goes with these with questions and then codified results that we rank folks on. And so we do this across the gamut. We did this for Booz Allen, as I had mentioned, and came up with our own scores about ultimately where we wanted to be. This was sort of how we baselined what we wanted to do and how we wanted to move forward. Secondly, it's kind of a deep dive into what are some of the things that we can do to further advance the capability when you think about it within the sense of the 6 different elements. And so when I go out and talk to clients about ADAPT+C, and ultimately sort of once we do the assessment, what comes out of that, we have to determine what types of capabilities and service offerings can we provide to them so that we can essentially up their capability, increase their capability within one particular component. And so these are a couple of examples. Some of my favorites, ultimately, and what we've talked about here yesterday, is a lot of the pieces that fit under data, right? Getting your data ready to actually start to analyze it. And then, where are your people aligned and how are you upskilling your folks? There's two specific things we've done around that. One is created a Hogan assessment for folks that are data scientists to identify, actually for folks who are analytically minded, to identify who is most likely to have the skill sets and capabilities to actually become a data scientist. And so we've used that in different organizations, and it was ultimately built on some review and analysis of the data scientists that we currently have at Booz Allen. So that's been one successful thing, especially in light of all these other things. And then ultimately really thinking about the overall culture and how do you start to have conversations across the board with your organization to start to get your folks to think differently about the data, right? I'm going to get into that a little bit more when we go into the lessons learned of what I've experienced so far applying this for Booz Allen. So once you've kind of got that baseline set and really figured out where you want to ultimately drive to, the next thing to do is to think about, I think we mentioned it this morning, but some low-hanging fruit. Where are some examples where you can really start to work within a specific project and start to show results to people about how this can all work together? And so the ADAPT+C model also allows you to think about the particular question that you want to ask, and then work through the different elements to determine what your needs are, what your current capabilities are, and then ultimately what you still need to build or what your roadblocks might be to ultimately get to the end of that particular project or pilot project. So a lot of times coming out of the assessment, what we'll recommend is folks thinking through maybe their top 3 use cases or priorities based on a number of different things. The needs of the business, as well as kind of the availability of the different components within ADAPT+C. Because ultimately, if you've got a lot of gaps based on the question you want to answer, it's probably not the best one to start with. You probably want to start thinking about a different one. So once we've thought through kind of what those initial projects need to be, then we work with clients to develop ultimately a 3-year roadmap of how to increase your capability across the 6 different elements. And typically what we see during this phase is a focus on a couple of elements kind of at the same time, but building collectively as we get through the 3 years to make sure that you're advancing in totality. So when we go back and think about the assessment and sort of what your quote-unquote scores were at the beginning of following the assessment, we typically focus on the ones that were the lowest first to try to build that capability and ultimately get you to a point where you can assess almost like an annual or biannually to make sure that you're actually advancing the capability. This is something we're thinking about actually for the next year because it's been almost a year and a half now since we've done our original assessment within Booz Allen. And so ultimately, what we see ADAPT+C as is a way to truly organize some of the growth opportunities that you're looking at within your organizations and to find sort of a common ground of how to talk about them, not only with your leadership, but also with the staff, and to help them figure out sort of where they fit into the total overall landscape of what you're essentially trying to drive. And what's kind of critical across all the 6 elements is that you never really want to think about one in particular at one time. You ultimately want to be thinking about them sort of collectively to make sure that you're advancing each of them and not only focusing on one particular element. And that's been one of the things I've seen kind of from a critical standpoint at Booz Allen. So let's think about how we've kind of done this at Booz Allen and what some of the lessons learned have been. So I have been part of our data science team over the course of the last 5 or 6 years. As I mentioned, we developed some collateral and some books about how to talk about data science. We went through some computer-based trainings to try to upskill our own staff and ultimately created kind of this capability. And I sort of followed along on that journey for 5 years. And so last year when we stood up a transformation office to try to advance and transform some of the things that we were doing, we wanted to actually use some of the capabilities that we were selling to clients and apply them internally. And so I was asked to do that. I was given a small team of sort of matrixed folks to work with me, and we went through a series of following the ADAPT+C model through the assessment and also through building the roadmap with a host of internal folks, both the data owners as well as some of our market leads and market users. I've told people, I've been at Booz Allen for 18 years, and honestly, what I'm driving today has been like my dream job because, as many of you might know, you move through your career and you hold different jobs, right? I've been a manager, I've been a project lead, I've worked proposals, I've worked in a bunch of different places within the organization, and at each time I found myself, working through Excel, trying to get through, combining data together, and really truly answering questions. And what has been the most fun part of being able to drive this for Booz Allen is being able to think through how we can make some of those data gathering efforts and answering those questions in a much more automated way. And so ultimately that's what kind of drives me every day to be able to support our staff, internally. So let's think about, there's 3 specific lessons learned I kind of wanted to go through with you all in the hopes that maybe if you're starting on your own journey, it might be something that might help you. So within our organization, we've got all of our data sort of sitting in places, right? And we've got actually internal analytics groups many times sitting and working within that one context of data, right? You've got your kind of people data, you've got your business data, et cetera, and it's in a data warehouse. And so one of the things we started to stand up is I said we need to move stuff to the cloud, or we at least need to stand up a cloud environment where we can start to analyze these pieces and pull them in and complete the analytics. And then, but we don't necessarily need to touch any of the production data right now. We'll just leave it sit there. So we had a bunch of conversations over the course of several months. And what I realized is many of those data owners, don't really think about the data in the context of raw data. They think about it like reports. So they would say, Shelly, okay, we can give you this data. What exactly do you need from it? And they would provide me with a report. And I said, I don't want the report. I actually want the raw data. And they said, oh, you want it like on a per staff member context? And I said, yeah, because that's really the only way we're going to start to make linkages. And so one of the things we had to do was have a bunch of conversations about the types of things we could do with the data if we had access to the raw data and not necessarily just reports. So reports are oftentimes a great way to get started. But ultimately, as you all know, we need kind of access to the raw data. The best way for us to work through that approach has been to kind of specify sort of an action officer or a champion for each of those data sources that's willing to work with us, has the ability to think a little bit differently, and really be kind of a catalyst and a culture change within that particular part of the organization. And that's when we found the most success in working with those folks, specifically. So secondly, one of the things that, as we briefed senior leadership on a couple of these specific pilot projects we wanted to do, they said, Shelly, this looks like a Gantt chart that's going to cost me a lot of money. And the way I want to think about it is you are either increasing revenue or you're actually putting money back into the business because you're creating efficiencies through some of this automation. So how do you really ultimately think about the metrics and the return on investment specifically for these couple of projects that you specifically want to do? And ultimately, how does that advance us against the set of objectives and parameters that we really want to put in place to become more data-driven overall? And so we started thinking through, because we do a lot of reporting, so we have plenty of numbers. That wasn't really the challenge. But some of the challenges that I thought we faced was thinking about those baseline metrics in a way where we could make a change. So thinking about setting up the specific things we wanted to measure and making sure that when we did make that change and implement, a new process, a new technology, a new set of data, a change, that we could ultimately measure those metrics again on the back end and ultimately see if we needed to tweak the change to be able to ultimately get to where we wanted to with regards to the project. So this is something we're still working on as an organization. I'm sure many of you might be in that same stage as well. But what has been successful in the sense of kind of explaining it to people is to really put a point on what it looks like from an hours and cost perspective, right? So making sure one of the processes that we are in the process of changing right now is an approval process that each and every one of our staff does on a daily basis, and that our managers do twice a month. And it doesn't take a lot of time, but it takes, minutes to half hours worth of time out of everybody's day when we need to complete these approvals. And so by adding automation in and actually doing almost like a stop timer on how long it takes folks to do those small bits of work, we were actually able to multiply that out and aggregate it to be hundreds of thousands of hours worth of our employees' time, and essentially millions of dollars that we're spending a year on kind of an administrative project. So once folks saw those numbers and knew that we had used kind of a conservative approach to get there and to talk about it, they were much more comfortable with kind of where we were going, what the overall benefit of that particular project was, and why we should advance it kind of moving forward. The third one has been around where we put the people. So when I mentioned when we first stood this up, we were sort of a matrix organization. One of the best things about working in an organization like Booz Allen is we've got a lot of smart people that are out working for clients day in and day out. So even though I'm focused more internally, I still have access to those people on a somewhat frequent basis. So we have an innovation group that we have stood up that is focused on data science and artificial intelligence. And recently I was talking to one of the other staff there, and they had a specific example of an algorithm that they had created that was completely relevant to something else I was trying to solve. So we were able to bring in a small subset of teams, specific kind of that cloud notion on the bottom, and said, these are really the people we want to use. We really only want to use them for a few months, and then we can push them back out to client work. But we ultimately just want to use the right capabilities for specific to when we want to do something a little bit different and pull those people kind of in-house and actually use them. So you'll see that we started off with a bit of a matrix organization with folks kind of out in the markets, and not really anybody that was truly dedicated to the capability. It was a little bit of a coalition of the willing, you might say, in terms of making a change. And so starting this year and into the future, we're looking at it a little bit differently, where we are pulling people in with specific skill sets based on what the current client need is, or what our need is as far as an organization, and really putting those people together against those specific projects. So in terms of key takeaways, one of the things, I've been to a bunch of other conferences throughout the course of the years, and I've always enjoyed engagement with others as far as, where some of the struggles that they were having, in terms of specific projects and how that related to me. And so, really solving for, building this up within your own organization, what I've found is that having leadership support from the top, ultimately to be able to advance the capability, put the right resources around it, and really apply metrics and show progress within, as you're moving along, as well as working towards kind of an overall goal, right? So the ADAPT+C model has helped us to be able to create almost like a vernacular within our organization about how we wanted to move forward. And so we found benefit in that, and we've had multiple successes along the way. So any questions? I know we're moving on to the next one. Yes?
So going back to your maturity model, what sort of a view on, say, for instance, we want to be a level 3, not a level 5, because 3 is good enough. Uh-huh. How do you specify what capabilities or what opportunities that you then create at each level to say, I can at least justify to go to 3, I can't justify to go to 5, but at least I can get the ball rolling?
Yeah. So behind all of those, that eye chart I had with the 55 different sub-elements, there are actually a host of questions and specific service offerings that we have that align to each and every one of those specific areas. And so a lot of times, based on how our clients sort of answer those questions, that's how we start to align the specific capabilities that match up with those challenges. So it is true that we've done this for federal clients. Once again, we've done it for ourselves. We've done it for a bunch of different places. The assessment. And what I'll tell you is there's like not very many people out there that are at 5s, even in one place, right? And ultimately, that might not be where you need to go, which is definitely true. I think some of the places that really truly do run on data as their core, like manufacturing and stuff like that, in some cases might need to go to a 5 in some respects. But typically, we see people trying to advance from a 2 to a 3 or a 3 to a 4 ultimately. That answer your question? Okay. Yes?
First of all, great presentation. Sounds like you're a very kind of mature IT organization. I was expecting to see something like data governance in that circle, something that brings business closer to what you're doing. So you mentioned that you interact with business, and so I was thinking that it could be something that should be mentioned as well, because like I'm from the federal kind of government, and we're whatever we do, we're always subjected to a lot of policies and to a lot of
Right.
regulations. We do a lot of things that would need to be taken into consideration when we deal with data, and we are a data-centric organization, so we do a lot of risk assessment. So it's very business-centric and
Yeah.
data-centric.
So the question, for those of you who might not have heard, was how does data governance ultimately fit into this with data policies, et cetera? And you're spot on. So within the model, where it actually fits is within the data component, right? So the capability to build that is around data strategy, data governance, putting those building blocks sort of in place so that you can ultimately drive your capability. It's something that we've been working on specifically, and actually standing up a council to not only look at data, but also look at the technology that is supporting where we need our data to go, right? So it all has to move kind of in the same motion. And then also providing some policies around how we ultimately interact with our data. We're also standing up, we're working with Calibra to stand up some data dictionaries. All of those pieces fall within that data element of the model.
And just your slide 16 has a notional organizational structure. So I was thinking maybe you could ingest the CDO role there as well, because the data officers, they actually
Yes.
become more kind of pervasive in the data-driven organizations, and they're actually responsible. They're responsible for the data and information of the organization, and especially at the federal level. So it becomes really more and more, important.
Yes, he was talking about the role of the chief data officer. That's definitely something else we've looked at. We have not gone to a formal mechanism of that, but it's something we're looking at for the future and trying to figure out if that works for us. Yep. Yes.
So I have a question. You into the data science, and so what ratio between, we have 2 data science and 1 data programmer. So what ratio become data science and programmer? So help them out to achieve their step 1 to level 1 and to level 5. What ratio in your company to 1 data science and how many data programmer?
Yeah. So he's asking about the ratios of how many data scientists you really need to advance the capability, down the line. I have to say I haven't really thought about it that way. We are on a journey as an organization. So keep in mind, what I'm driving is kind of on our internal side, but we've got, like I said, a whole cadre of folks that support federal clients and some commercial clients. And what we have been, the other thing that we have stood up is what we call a data science 5K challenge. Which means that within 5 years, we ultimately want to get to 5,000 data scientists within our organization, both by hiring them and also by training them. So we partnered with another institution that's providing training for those folks, and we're offering 60 hours worth of training to all of our staff under our training program to ultimately drive adoption of data science throughout the organization. Many of those folks will be, well, some of those folks will be coming to me internally to help us advance, our own internal capabilities, but the vast majority of them are going to be sent out to support clients and to start to change a lot of the way, or to try to help the federal government in thinking about how to change and move more into a data science and AI type position. I want to make sure I'm watching time. I think I'm out of time.
Those are great questions, and thank you, Shelly. That was wonderful.
Sure.